council meeting. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Brownstone?
Here.
Councilmember Penrose?
Here.
Mayor Rohrbeck?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Play ball. I have one public comment card. Anybody who wishes to address the council on items that are not on the agenda, please fill one of these out and give it to our clerk. Kate Comfort Har.
Now is it turned on? There we go. So hello, I am Kate Comfort Har. I am Executive Director of HIP Housing, and I am here tonight to present our 2020 calendar and to say thank you to the council and to the staff of Half Moon Bay for your support of our affordable housing programs. But before I do anything else, I just want to say I spent the afternoon in your library, which I had never been to before, and it was amazing. I watched kids practicing a play and people checking out computers, and it's spectacular. You must be so proud. So that was a great way to spend the afternoon. Thank you. So back to the calendar. I'm here tonight actually with two of my board members. One is a local resident here in Half Moon Bay, Bill Palmer, who's sitting in the back here. And also joined on the other side is our other Bill Lowell, who also sits on our board. So that was kind of a surprise. I wasn't expecting to see him here. But you know, most people who know HIP Housing know us because of our home sharing program. And the reason that is that we house about 650 people in that program each year, low-income people. Here in Half Moon Bay, we have 15 people in home sharing arrangements as an affordable housing opportunity, and we provide referral and information services to quite a few more people, 53 people we're working with right now in Half Moon Bay who have affordable housing challenges. So overall, when you look at the number of folks that HIP Housing serves, through our home sharing program, our self-sufficiency program for families, and our property management and development, we're housing 1,400 people each year. So working with another 3,500 on information referrals and housing assistance. So touching the lives of a lot of people. Home sharing matches people who have space in their home with people who need an affordable place to live. Of the providers of housing, about 80% are low income, about another 55% are seniors, another 25% are disabled. On the seeker side, 90% are low income, and about 75% of them self-declare that before entering home sharing, they were either homeless or at risk of homelessness. So the service that we provide is pretty important, and we're so grateful for your support of home sharing. The calendar is our way to say thank you and to show our appreciation. Every year we ask kids from around the county to draw pictures and tell us what home means to them. And then we create this calendar, and I don't get involved in the selecting because we get hundreds and hundreds of entries, and it makes me cry, so I don't. But I'd like to read you my favorite quote this year. So it's in April, and a fifth grader, her name's Natalie. Natalie says, "Home means safe to me. It's where my family, heart, food, and all the important things in life reside. Wherever I go, I always have my home in my heart. It's like a box where everything special is inside me." So just a reminder that housing is so important to not just the children in our community, but to our healthy communities. So again, thank you for your support. If you want to hear more about the calendar, tomorrow night is our calendar reveal party, and we'll have all of the children there reading the quotes. There's invitations in your calendars, so if you'd like to join us, we would love to have you. And I'd be happy to take any questions if you have any questions about our programs.
I have no questions, just a real appreciation for what HIP Housing does. And I would really like to go to the reveal party tomorrow.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. We would love to have you there.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you there. So if you don't take anything else away from this, please, if you know anybody who has a room or space in their home to share, please send them our way. We'd be happy to help them find someone to rent that room. We put it to very good use in a very safe and an easy way. So thank you so much.
Thank you. John Ullum?
Is it on?
Yeah, I think
Thanks.
so.
John Ulm, first of all, I want to thank you for the new format. Bringing this public comment up front is a vast improvement to how it used to be. And a lot of people don't have the time to stay for as long as it was required. Really do appreciate that. I think that's a step forward. As you know, tomorrow you're going to have a party celebrating the accomplishments of the new library, mainly relating to the LEEDS certification. And I was wondering if you really understood what it is that you really accomplished out there, because we paid $50,000 basically to get this proof. Someone had to manage the project. Someone had to certify that we actually did the steps required to get this plaque. But it really doesn't signify that much as compared to your library bill. Now, this is something to brag about, folks. This is something to be proud of. This is something you can take home and show your smart aleck brother-in-law that there are ways to be green and that it makes financial sense. What we have here is, I screwed up the chart. I meant 2016, not 2018 while you're looking at it. Basically, what I'm looking at is energy bills from January till June of 2019. And what you see is the bills went from $2,500 in January, pretty much that the same in February, March, and then something must have got turned on because it went to negative $742 in April, another negative $722 in May, and only $19 in June. I don't know what the sun was up to that month, but we got and obviously something that's going to pay for itself in a reasonable amount of time, but 15, 20 years, which is a good investment. That's something I can tell to my stepfather, who's a really good guy, but he's a redneck. He gets his information from talk radio. Now, I laugh at talk radio too, but there are some good things that happen there. But, you know, there are still people who contend that the meter cannot run backwards, that it's a liberal myth that you can put solar power on a building and run so much power from that you could spin the meter backwards. Now, everybody here's looking at me, you gotta be kidding me, because you don't really need a lot of thinking to know what. But that's true, and people know it. People know that for a fact, that you cannot make meter go backward because you can't pump enough power into the system to make that happen. Now, I can show them this. That ain't gonna convince them. That will convince the choir. That ain't gonna convince my smart aleck Uncle Jim or Howard or anybody else. I show them that, and there's nothing to say. I hope you'll think about that tomorrow when you're bragging about what you've accomplished, which you rightly should. This is cool. This means something. Thank you.
Thank you, John. There's a lot more reason than saving money to go green, so. The next item is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The next item is proclamations and presentations. Yeah? There are none, thank you. The next item is mayor's announcements of community activities and community service. As John just alluded, tomorrow at 2:30, we're going to have a brief celebration of the fact that our library achieved LEED Platinum status. It'll be a nice low-key event. We're going to have, Don Horsley's going to be there. The architect, one of the architects of the library is going to be there. And we'll have simple refreshments. So if you'd like to see the library up close, I'm sure a lot of you already have, come 2:30 tomorrow. The other thing I'd like to announce is our annual Night of Lights, which is pushed back 1 week from the usual time. It's going to be on December 13th. That's a Friday night, from 5 to 8. So that's always a fun event. We're going to have a lot going on Main Street, a parade. A lot of merchants are going to be offering good deals. There'll be chestnuts. It's a nice opportunity. So I recommend that on the 13th. Next item on our agenda is report out from closed session. Our city attorney will do that.
Thank you. The council met in closed session earlier this evening to discuss one item, conference with real property negotiators regarding unimproved property located at 723 Mill Street in use as a public parking lot. The council took no reportable action on this item.
Thank you, Catherine. City manager updates to council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The library has now been mentioned 3 times in this short meeting, and we're going to do it one more time. So it was our plan to also give a plug for tomorrow's ceremony, and so our city engineer is here to actually make a few comments about the library and what it means to achieve LEED Platinum, what were some of the features that went into it. So he'll do that now for some of the people that can't make the celebration tomorrow. Maz.
Thank you, Bob. So I'm happy to say that I was one of the many people that worked on this project. It was a wonderful project to work on. This is one of those once-in-a-lifetime type projects that really show a lot of different aspects of construction and engineering. And working on a LEED Platinum project really did incorporate quite a bit of different elements to our sustainable efforts and our energy efficiency. Some of the features that include are the solar power cells on the roof, utilization of natural ventilation versus mechanical HVAC system, in-floor hydronic heating, which is essentially piping that runs warm water, hot water to heat the room and the different rooms in different places. Of course, the drought-tolerant and native landscaping, that's been something that the city's been working on in the region as a whole for quite some time. Reduced flow plumbing, as well as many other pieces. One thing I really want to highlight is, as some of the comments that have been said so far, the thing that I'm the most proud of is when we look at that utility bill. And seeing that negative amounts and those, $15 basically account fees that they charge. That basically, those smaller sums of money, that's what those are, is just the PG&E account. And so that's going to be the big piece. And one of the other things we're working on is compiling that data of the energy bill usage, and we're going to be submitting for certification for net zero energy as well. And so that'll be something, we need about 12 months of data. So that'll be something that'll be coming up in the next few months. And with that, just want to plug the plaque unveiling that's tomorrow, Wednesday, December 4th at 2:30 for folks that are available at the library. Anybody's welcome to come, and if you have any questions for me, happy to answer them.
Thank you, Maz.
And then, Mr. Mayor, we just have a few more announcements. We've mentioned the event tomorrow. You've mentioned the Night of Lights. It's actually a very busy month as we round out the year here. Colleen Lettieri will announce a few more events that are coming up in the next 2 weeks.
Good evening, Honorable City Council. I don't know if you've heard, but we have a LEED certification plaque unveiling tomorrow. It's happening at 2:30.
I had no idea.
No idea? Okay, good to know. Well, it's up there just for your knowledge. So yes, we do have a ton of events coming up this month. One that was left off the list is the Saturday with Santa that's happening this Saturday at the Half Moon Bay Library. So you get to take your pictures with Santa. Apparently, allegedly, snow might be coming. So we'll see. And then we also have the Parks and Recreation Commission meeting that's happening next Wednesday, and then our Poplar Street Traffic Calming and Safety Project Community Meeting, a mouthful, is happening Thursday, December 12th. And then we also have our City Council reorganization ceremony, Tuesday, December 17th, and finishing off the year strong with our State of the City on Wednesday, December 18th. So that's what we have going on. So
And that's also at the library.
yes, at the library. So make sure to spread the word, share the news, and we hope to see you all there.
Councilmember Penrose has an announcement.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knew about La Posada, the annual pilgrimage of Jesus, of Joseph and Mary, pregnant Mary, she hasn't had Jesus yet, on a donkey through Half Moon Bay, knocking on doors, asking for a room, and being told there was no place for them there. This happens, it's the Oaxacan community in town puts it on. It's a wonderful event. You walk with candles, and then there's a celebration with food and celebrating Christmas and, I guess, Jesus Christ's birth, right? Fun. Friday the 21st.
Thank you. The next item is our consent calendar. Does anyone wish to pull any item? No. May I have a motion, please?
I'd like to move that we approve the minutes from October the 1st, 2019 City Council meeting. I'd like to move that we adopt a resolution setting the 2020 residential dwelling unit allocation and administration system pursuant to Half Moon Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 17.06, for 69 residential dwelling units, 46 units for the downtown, and 23 units outside of the downtown. I would like to move that we adopt a resolution adopting Affordable Housing Fund allocation guidelines, and move that we accept the AB 1600 report on development impact fees for fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019. Additionally, move that we adopt a resolution authorizing the city manager to execute a 10-year agreement establishing a building safety inspection program mutual aid agreement with the cities within and the county of San Mateo.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The consent calendar passes. The next item is item 2A, which is a proposed enactment of city ordinance regarding residential rental security measures. I have 10 comments. Anyone else wishes to add to this list, please do so. First, we'll have a staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council and community members. We appreciate you being here tonight. The item before you is a residential rental security measures ordinance. It's a proposed first reading. And I'm Jill Egas. I'm the Community Development Director, and I'm just going to give a quick overview of what we'll be presenting. And I will cover a little bit of background and what we've done in terms of communicating with our community over the last couple of years. Bill Lowell, the city's housing consultant, will cover some highlights about Half Moon Bay housing types and recent state legislation, AB 1482. And then our Deputy City Attorney, Sarah Clark, will give an overview of the ordinance that you are considering tonight. This is a public hearing item, and so you will be taking public hearing and having council deliberation, and of course, we are here to field questions as you move through this. So we just want to be clear because this has been a conversation that you've been having for a couple years, and it's been in a number of different forums, and we've done a lot of work to include different community members in different manners throughout this time. And it really got kicked off in 2018 with two very well-attended community conversations about housing. Those were supported by San Mateo County's Home for All initiative, and we heard a lot from tenants and learned a lot about how housing insecurity has been affecting our local community members, and that has been brought into your council listening sessions, where you had multiple sessions in the spring of both 2018 and 2019. And then in your multi-year city council priority setting, you have identified affordable housing as a priority, and we expect that to continue for several years going forward. Specific study sessions that we've had in this room with you that at the time we'd been calling them tenant protection measures, along with quite a few other things that you'd been working on with housing. Dates are on this slide here. In particular, we note that in January 2019, we had a draft ordinance for you. It was a study session. It was not a first reading. And we had quite a bit of input, and we're going to talk about how this revised ordinance responds to that. Also of note, we saw you in October with what you just approved tonight. Thank you. We're so excited for you and the community. The Affordable Housing Fund allocation guidelines is now at your ready to be used. And you reminded me in no uncertain terms to bring this ordinance to you this year, if at all possible. You specifically, in July, directed us to touch base with the real estate community on some of the things they brought up in January, but also to conduct some additional research about our housing types, and we have done that. We've looked into all of the things that were brought up in January. You heard a lot of input, and you're going to hear more tonight, we're sure, and we're very interested in where the community is on this. But it was clear in January, and then we had follow-up with representatives from SAMCAR, the San Mateo County Realtors, and California Apartment Association. And it was consistent with what you heard in January. They were very concerned about relocation and enhanced notice. There was kind of a mix of comfort level with minimum lease terms at that time, but that was in advance of the passage of AB 1482, and Bill will talk about that in a little bit here. And city-funded mediation, we heard mostly supportive, although I did hear a few concerns about that as well. In particular, SAMCAR suggested that they actually have some really good resources for helping tenants, and so that was a good learning for us, and we appreciated that. And they also encouraged us to reframe this topic and rename the initiative, which we have done. So the response here is, and also because it's coordinated with AB 1482, this ordinance does not include relocation, and it does not include enhanced notice. Those two things are covered in AB 1482, and Bill will discuss that. We focused on minimum lease terms and mediation, and we expect you to hear mostly about minimum lease terms tonight. And now I'm going to turn it over to Bill, who's going to get into his part.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, council members. At one of the recent meetings, you had requested more information about some of the facts of housing in Half Moon Bay, how many people would be affected by different ordinances, how many different types of houses or housing units are there in different categories. So I want to go over a bit of that with you. Tried to keep it simple before everyone's eyes glaze over, but I have a couple slides on this portion. This first one is saying that there is a total at the bottom of 4,716 total housing units. and that's reflected above that. Half Moon Bay, as pretty much everybody knows, is primarily single-family homes, including attached, is the 72%. That's definitely higher than the county as a total. 2 to 4 units, 277. 5 or more units, 494. And mobile homes, 533. At 11%, that's also, I believe, the highest in the county, given the history of the coast and Half Moon Bay in particular. These numbers, by the way, come from the California Department of Finance, what they call the E5 report, which comes out each January. So using that total number of units, the 4,700, and we go over here, to look at, as you know, the ordinance is going to be discussed later, proposed ordinance, excuse me, deals with 2 or more units. It reflects the state law, new law 1482, 2 or more units, except for duplexes that have an owner-occupied unit. So I wanted this, what this is saying is there's a question of how many folks would be affected by an ordinance, proposed ordinance that's going to be discussed in a minute. So the total number of housing units, again, is 4,716. The total number that are 2 or more units, so theoretically those are the maximum number of units that would be affected by the proposed ordinance. It comes from, just go back one, so it's those 2, the 2 to 4 units, the 277, and the 5 or more units, the 494. That total is 771. From that, we take 392. That is the number of deed-restricted units that already exist, that exist in Half Moon Bay. So it's some of the larger complexes on the southern part of Main Street, like Half Moon Village and the housing over the senior center, and a couple of the other large complexes. Those are already deed-restricted in terms of their rent and other conditions. So then that leaves a potential subject to the ordinance of about 379. And then one more deduction, as best as we can figure, and this would be true within a few units, duplexes with an owner-occupied unit, about 52. So if we take those off, the estimated total number of housing units that would be subject to the proposed ordinance would be 327, about 7% of the city's housing. You probably know this, but to give everybody, make sure everybody's on the same page, kind of a simple overview of 1482, which was, of course, passed and signed into law by the governor a couple of months ago. This is definitely a sea change in population in California. It's some ideas that have been brought up over the years and did not pass, but did this time. So two main pieces of the legislation. The first one, there are annual rent caps of 5% plus the year's consumer price index, CPI, up to a total of a 10% max. So if the CPI was 3%, the maximum rent cap for that year would be 5 plus 3 or 8%. And that goes back to, it covers rent increases that came into effect any time past March 15th of this year. The second big part of 1482 is a just cause, meaning that tenants who are evicted need to be evicted for a cause, some violation of the rental rules or lease. As examples there are failure to pay rent, property damage, and so on. What this requires is, in the law, or let me put it this way, it comes into effect after a tenancy has reached 12 months. So it's not in effect before 12 months. It starts with once 12 months have occurred of tenancy. A couple more items. The no-fault just cause. There are two types of just cause. The fault would be that the tenant has done something like not paid rent. The no-fault means that if there could be for some reason the unit is being taken off the market, there could be conversion to new occupancy or removal from the rental market by some other, maybe it's going to be a long-term renovation. That's regarded as no fault under the law. It requires relocation assistance, and the relocation assistance amount is either 1 month's rent or forgiveness of the last month rent. So we call it 1 month or last month. And then, importantly, there are exemptions to the law, and those are, there's a long list, but this would probably cover about 98% of them. Single-family homes are not included. Duplexes where one of the units is owner-occupied are not included. Deed-restricted affordable units, and units built within the last 15 years. The entire law is treated as an emergency measure, and that's why the state came up with this idea of caps. It expires in 10 years. And can take questions in a moment, but when we look, just before we get into the ordinance, or our attorney gets into the ordinance, there are two pieces, as Jill mentioned. One is this minimum lease term, and the second is a mediation. The details will be covered in just a minute, but the idea of the minimum lease term is that a lease would always be offered, a 12-month lease would always be offered. Needn't be accepted, but must be offered. And it would cover that first year that 1482 does not cover. Mediation, I think the comments so far over the history of the discussion of this and as seen in other communities, it's trying to offer an additional path to dispute resolution, which would be funded by the city. So it would be voluntary, and it's helps on occasion to have the availability of someone independent of either of the parties in the transaction to be able to help mediate. So that's the idea behind mediation. Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, Council. I'm going to speak about the two main topics that Bill has just introduced and explain how the proposed ordinance would work. So first, I wanted to talk about the proposed minimum lease term requirement. What this does is it requires landlords to offer a 1-year written lease with any initial rental and at any renewal. The terms that are included in that lease are discretionary up to the landlord. So the landlord is free to set the rental price and any other salient terms in that lease agreement remains in their discretion. After that offer is made, the tenant can then elect to either accept the lease term that is being offered or reject. And if the tenant rejects the proposed minimum lease term, then they have the opportunity to negotiate something shorter than a year-long lease, and that second type of lease could be either written or oral. This also would apply to existing leases, but only when certain triggering events occur. So that's if the existing lease is offered for renewal, the landlord would need to comply with the provision at that time. Or if there's a proposed rent increase, then again, the landlord would need to make that offer of a minimum lease term of 1 year. As you are aware, we've talked about this provision over the course of the last year, and one of the main changes that we've made to it in response to 1482 and also feedback is to provide certain exemptions from this requirement for a couple of different reasons. The primary one is we wanted to match this up with AB 1482, also known as the Tenant Protection Act. I want to note on the slide here, it says what's not covered. If you're looking at your hard copy, it's a little confusing. It says what's covered, but the items at the bottom of this slide are actually the exemptions. And again, as Bill alluded to, there's a long list of types of units that would be excluded from the proposed terms, namely units that were built in the last 15 years, those owner-occupied duplexes, and most single-family homes and condos. We also added some minor tweaks to the exemption list from 1482. First, we do exempt units that are rented as a condition of employment or by a corporation. We recognize that those are sort of different types of leases than your typical lease, and you might want to have, say, for instance, a lease that's offered as part of a a park district staff short-term employment period. You don't want to make them be in a year-long a lease situation. And then the other carve-outs that we've had are some minor tweaks to ensure that the proposed ordinance doesn't conflict with any of the provisions in AB 1482. Happy to get into details on that if you have questions. So that's the proposed ordinance and its proposal for minimum lease terms. The second main item that we are proposing tonight is the mediation program. Again, as Bill alluded to, this would be a city-sponsored mediation program, and either a tenant or a landlord, and this applies in any unit, could request city-sponsored mediation for a variety of disputes. And we call it a couple of common ones: rent disputes, disputes over retention of deposits or security deposits, issues related to maintenance or habitability concerns, or a violation of lease terms by tenants. So again, it can be requested either by the tenant or by the landlord. At the time of request, the city will review the facts on the ground and evaluate whether or not the dispute is likely to benefit from mediation, and then make a determination whether the case is sort of referred to a mediation program. If the city makes that election, then both the tenant and landlord must participate in that mediation, at least up to a certain point. But there's no guarantee of any outcomes here. There's no binding requirements that come from mediation. It's simply a forum in which studies have shown that it really can help resolve disputes in a way that is fair and equitable and useful to all sides. And so there are a number of other cities that have such programs that work to resolve a good number of disputes. It would be a third-party mediator, so someone not on city staff, but sort of a third party. There are a number of companies that run such services. And we expect that it can be paid for either out of the community development or community services budget. I want to make one final clarification. So we intended for the ordinance to not apply to mobile homes, and we wanted to make that particularly clear. So we're recommending addition of language to the proposed ordinance. This would be in section 7.70.020 in subsection F, and then we would add an exemption for rental of any mobile home or site within a mobile home park to ensure that the minimum lease terms provision does not apply to mobile homes. And that is in line with how 1482 works as well. So those are the broad strokes of the proposed ordinance. Again, as we have said, happy to answer any questions that council might have or respond to public comment. But I'll turn it back over to Jill for one moment.
So really, we're at the point now where if council would like to ask any clarifying questions, you could do so, although we'd encourage you to get right into your public hearing. You have quite a few folks in the room, and we're sure that they would like for you to consider their input while you have your deliberations. So if you had any questions about the specifics of 1482 or this draft ordinance, please do field them, though, to us. Thank you.
I just have one clarifying question. The mediation, is that being offered to all renters and all landlords, whether the apartment building has been built in the last 15 years or not, or whether it's a part of a duplex?
Yes, the proposed mediation program would be available to all tenants and all landlords in the city, regardless of the type of unit that is being occupied. So it's broader than the minimum lease terms.
Anyone else? I open the public hearing about this proposed ordinance. I have, as of this moment, 14 speaker cards. If something you say has already been said, in the interest of time, please just say, I agree with the previous speaker, or I agree with someone else. We'll try to keep this to the 3 minutes per speaker, but you don't have to take the full 3 minutes if what you have to say can be said in fewer than 3 minutes. My first speaker is Sharon Honeyman, followed by Elizabeth Honeyman.
Hello, thank you. I am a property owner on the coast, and I understand that this ordinance is designed to marginalize the community members or to assist the marginalized community members, but I do feel that it's going to be counterproductive and that the mom and pop landlords are going to be forced to either evict, raise rents, or take these units off the market, as I believe a majority of these mom and pop units are well below market rate at this time. So they're going to bring them up to rate and either evict or put family members in or just take them off the market and throw their hands up. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth Honeyman, followed by George Chekopoulos. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Honeyman. I've been a property owner on the coast for almost 35 years. I've been a landlady all that time. All my years of renting, I've rented mostly to teachers and students. My rental fees have always historically been 40% less than what everybody else is getting. I have a soft spot for teachers. If this goes through, you're killing the goose that's laid the golden eggs, because I will no longer rent. I am not going to put up with more bureaucratic BS. I have had tenants that I couldn't get rid of them. They love it there. And I've been encouraged by 2 members of council to please put another ADU unit on my 3rd property. Well, after hearing this, there's no way in hell I'll do that. Why put up with all this? I've been a good landlady. I've been an exceptionally good landlady. And I have a soft spot, as I said, for teachers. You're going to have 3 teachers that no longer will get a low market rental. You're killing the golden goose. I hope you think about this.
Thank you. George, I think it's Chekopoulos, you can correct me, followed by Barbara LeVay.
That was done really well.
Thank you.
Nobody gets that right. Good job. So George Chekopoulos, I'm a member of SAMCAR. I'm a realtor in San Mateo. And I'm just here, I was alerted to this requirement for a 12-month lease minimum, and I thought, wow, that's kind of really taken it to, it's just very bureaucratic. You know, I feel like I'm a fair landlord, and I'm a mom and pop. I'm just actually a pop and mom. You know, I believe that you need to have fairness between your tenants and your the landlords. And in many cases, mom and pops have had long-term tenants who have been in properties for years, and they're under market, and everything goes well. And now each city here in the San Mateo County is dealing with trying to have retroactive time frames for the state mandated rent control. And at our meeting, actually was a state meeting at SAMCAR 2 weeks ago, we learned that, I wasn't aware of this, that every county in the state is under what's the word, protection? We're in a state of emergency, which means in terms of rentals, the maximum rent increases allowed would be 10%, which to me that's excessive. So when this state rent control was passed, it's not an unfair rent control on the landlord's part. It's a protection for the tenant. But to be told that you are required to have a 12-month lease rental minimum, that is just too bureaucratic. That's like socialism. That's almost communism, telling someone what they are allowed to rent a property out for. I mean, in the past, it's worked well that somebody could have 6-month lease, a month-to-month, or a 12-month lease, and that's worked fine. The tenant agrees to it, the landlord agrees to it. There's nothing wrong with that. The tenant should not, pardon me, the landlord should not be forced into having a 12-month rental, especially if you get a loser tenant. I don't want to say that, but, and you could be a loser landlord as well. I mean, it goes both ways, but you should not be forced to have a 12-month rental. That's all.
Thank you, George.
And a question,
Yeah.
what is the reason for the 12-month minimum? Why is that superseding the state mandated rent control? Maybe you can explain that to us afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We're not really permitted to engage in dialogue, but we'll certainly consider what you've asked. Barbara LeVay, followed by Tom Soleil.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm here to just encourage you, please, to just let AB 1482 just land for just a little bit. We're all just kind of getting used to it, and I've already heard a story today that chilled me. You know, I asked some people to come here with their stories, if they had any, to share them with you, because I didn't have any recent ones, but this one came to me. He couldn't be here, so I promised to tell his story. He had a family that had just recently been evicted as a result of 1482. Why? Because the rent was low. And then they felt that, oh, we better bring it up to market rate now. So get these people out and start over again. And these people don't have Social Security cards. They don't have good credit references. They don't have a good FICO score. But this friend of mine, he endorsed them. He told the landlord, they'll be good for it. They maybe put more money on deposit just to secure that, but they're in. Now imagine if this landlord heard that they have to be in for, they're guaranteed right from the get-go, a year's lease with no trial period. That doesn't allow the landlord and the tenant to establish a good relationship. It already puts them at odds with one another, and it really scares the landlord to think that, whoa, wait a minute, you don't have a good FICO score, and you don't have references except for this one guy, they're not going to rent to them. So that's one case in point that was chilling to me, and I really wanted to bring it to you because that is one of the consequences that we'll face. And then we're stuck with people without houses, and we have a housing crisis. This is not going to help, all right? So I just really think that we should just let 1482 land. Let's get used to it. Let me see if I had anything else to say. I just don't think that this minimum lease term would help our situation whatsoever. So, but I do like the mediation. I think that that will help because oftentimes in real estate we find that the misunderstandings are so well resolved with just a little bit of mediation. Everybody just can flesh out what the lease terms were and come to a resolution and continue on with a good relationship. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom Soleil, followed by Stacy Kugler.
Hi, I'm Tom Soleil. I'm a resident of Half Moon Bay. I live at 332 Spruce Street. I'm in a process of putting an ADU in right now in my backyard, which is detached. And if, under this provision, that if it puts restrictions on me renting my house out, I think that's something that you definitely don't need to pass. I have another rental on 825 3rd that we haven't raised our rent in 4 years. This year, my property taxes went up $1,200. Still not going to raise our rent. We got a young couple in there with kids, and they're just making ends meet. And if it's going to put restrictions on me after I get this ADU done, I'll put my dog or one of my kids in it before I rent it out. So I think you should just defeat this. Thank you.
Thank you. Stacy Kugler, followed by Frank Vento.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am not rich, but I am a property owner. I am a single mother of 2, and I struggle to make ends meet. I am a real estate agent and fight for the rights of the people that I support. Most of them are first-time home buyers. That is my favorite group of people to help. because I also was once a first-time home buyer. I am for tenant rights, but I'm also for property owner rights. If it's not a win-win, it doesn't seem ethical to me. I also want you to consider the other side. What this measure could have on the effect of the housing crisis. We've heard today a few stories about how people would not rent, how the geese of the golden eggs could not rent, and that would just make a problem a lot worse. I do want to see the voices of tenants heard, but I also would like to see them be property owners at some point and not be hindered by the same laws that are meant to protect them. I also want to tell you a story of my own. A house that I own had a couple in there of means, and I had friends of mine who did not have means. They were having a similar situation of many of my clients where they didn't have social security numbers, they didn't have credit, they didn't have double the deposit, but they were good for rent, they were good people, they would take care of the property. And if I had this measure against me, I would not be able to gently remove one family that could easily find another housing solution and put in another family who really needed it and be able to lower the rental for them. Don't take that away from people who need it.
Thank you. Frank Vento, followed by Ralph Eli.
Thank you, council members and mayor, for taking our input on this ordinance. Couple things. You walk into most businesses, right to refuse service to anyone. Right? Seen the sign before. So with a 12-month, starting with this ordinance, is we've seen it happen before. I've had it happen to friends. House burns down, tree falls through it. Construction company comes in and says, hey, we're gonna need 6 months to rebuild this. Okay, great, go find a place to lease for 6 months. Sorry, you can't do it in Half Moon Bay. You're gonna have to move out of the area because this ordinance is, if the landlord is forced to offer 12 months first, and somebody comes and says, yeah, I want the 12 months. The next guy walks up, says, I only want 6. What's he do? There's room for negotiation there, but to force somebody to do 12 months right out of the gate, AB 1482, from the state level down to the local real estate agents, we're still trying to figure it out. So adding another layer on top of that, I just don't think the timing's right for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ralph Eli, followed by Linda Cross Anderson.
Hi, I'm Ralph Ely.
Sorry.
Live in Half Moon Bay the last 18 years. Been a real estate broker 47 years here on the coast. I've owned real estate rental property most of that time. I've done hundreds of leases since 1977. I at one time managed 87 other units. I don't know that I've ever done a one-year lease. I do a 3-month lease or a 6-month lease because I like to see if it's going to work, because sometimes it doesn't. Now, usually it does. I don't do credit checks. I shake hands and look in the eyes. I've had maybe 2 evictions in 47 years. This new statewide rent control is going to change rental activity in the state. It's major. It's going to make a big difference. I don't know, probably more good difference for tenants than property owners. But this ordinance that you're looking at now, I can't go with it. The 12-month lease up front, it stinks. I've never heard of it. I can't believe it, actually. I don't know where it came from. Mediation's great. I mean, real estate transactions, we sit down, We talk about it, and it works out most problems. It'll be good for rental. But this 12-month lease, don't pass it. Thanks.
Thank you. Linda, I think it's Cross Anderson, followed by Judy Taylor.
You are correct. Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to address. I have an 87-year-old mother who has been a landlady for the past 30 years when my father passed away. And she has a 12-unit complex that she manages all by herself. She has based that management on trust of being able to work with the people, the prospective tenants that she is allowed to live in her properties. If this passes, this is going to change her business drastically. And I would ask that you would please put this aside for now. There's a lot going on, and I think we really need to look at this. I also have a story of a friend, a good friend, who recently had to move from Half Moon Bay. She was a business owner. She was a valued member of the community, and her apartment building was sold. And the new owner raised the rent so high that the place where she and her family had lived for 12 years as perfect tenants, always paying rent on time, they were clean, they did all the repairs themselves, were forced to move. They couldn't find any place here. They had to move to Sacramento. So this community's lost a good member. I've lost a good friend locally. And once again, I really ask that you please think about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Judy Taylor, followed by Cassette Calder.
Good evening. I hate talking rent control. I'm so sick of talking rent control. First off, thank you for the mediation. Kudos on that. That has proven in many different places to be the thing that actually works. A question I posed to Jill, and we need to have real clarification on how this is going to apply to ADUs, because 1482 makes a distinction between attached and detached, and that's a real big issue for many of the people here. And to that point, we want people to create this kind of housing, but then you're telling people the first person that comes through that you make a deal with, they have the right to be your tenant for life. And that is number one. It's going to put more disincentive for creating affordable housing. And secondly, it is going to mean that any kind of a marginal tenant is going to be further marginalized. Only the people with good credit, only the people with good jobs, they're going to take somebody that's going to be using this as a weekend place over a regular tenant because they're going to be more secure. And that is totally in contradiction to what y'all are trying to do here. And to that point, I know that you had all of these listening sessions, and I know that there was some energy toward providing tenant protections, but I'm really unclear on where it came up that you needed a one-year lease. I mean, are you hearing about people being evicted after 6 months? I'm not hearing it. I'm not hearing it anywhere. And so if there's not a problem, why put more regulations that are in fact going to cause more of a disincentive? And I can tell you for a fact that if anybody already has a unit and they are looking at what to do with it, you are creating an incentive for them to go vacation rental rather than a tenant. And I know that is not what you want. But a property owner has far more control in that situation, and you're creating the likelihood that more of that is going to happen. So I really would ask you to put this on hold, do the mediation, put the minimum lease on hold until you see how 1482 works out. That is the only thing that for me makes any kind of sense at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Cassette Calder, followed by Eric Harger.
Hello. So I recently just purchased my first home, and before that I've been a tenant in multiple rental situations here on the coast and in other areas. So I've been used to paying market rents and am aware of the importance of providing protections for tenants. That said, over the last 5 years, I've made a lot of sacrifices in order to be able to purchase a home here, with budgets, lifestyle cuts to make this happen. Part of my vision as being a homeowner here in the Bay Area, and part of the motivation for making these sacrifices, was because I see myself in the future being able to rent out this home to other family members that I would like to help out, other friends that I'd like to help out, and in the meantime, I will put up my rental or on the market to other tenants. I think with passing I forgot the name, the minimum lease ordinance, it's going to make it more difficult for me to be able to offer it to family members or people in need, because it would cause too much of a risk for me. So I'd ask you just to reconsider this, and I don't think this will help with the Bay Area housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Eric Harger, followed by Ronnie Lynn Antonio. I hope I got that right.
Hello, Mayor, City Council members. I'm Eric Harger. Been on the coast here for about 20 years and got a duplex, that's it, and my house. So there's some things here that are not the fault of the landlords. The issue on the table is a very simple supply-demand imbalance of what we have here on the coast. This was created by people sitting in those chairs 20, 30, 40 years ago, slow growth initiatives. And so when you have slow growth, what do you get? So if I'm a builder and I want to build something, and it's right now it's all in, you're about $120,000 in with permits, water, PG&E hookups, before you've moved a rock on the property. Am I going to build a 2-bedroom, 1-bath affordable housing place and then sell that? Or am I going to build a 5-bedroom, 3-bath house that I can actually profit from? Those initiatives that were created here decades ago have created the problem as we're sitting and facing it today. That's not our fault. We didn't create that. Now, you guys are talking about bringing on, if I got my math right, about 138 new units. Why don't we wait and see how much that alleviates the problem instead of shoving this one down our throats? I mean, the big brother thing is not great. It disincentivizes. So at my duplex, I've got a double lot, and I'm actually in the process right now of looking at building a second duplex. If you pass this, I will not. Not only is it less housing, but construction jobs are going to not be there because it doesn't make sense. I'm going to go build somewhere else. So the simplest part here that I want you to understand right now is you pass this, it is an absolute guarantee that all rents go up. Why? If you're going to stick it to me at the end to give them a free month rent, say I rent a unit for $2,400. Well, $2,400 divided by 12 months is $200 a month. Every month it's going to go up by $200 because I know that on the back end of it they're going to get a free month anyway, so I might as well get it out of them now. I'm guaranteeing you rents are going up. So this isn't something to consider, well, it's really going to make it powerful for the tenants. It's going to wreck it for the tenants. I mean, they did rent control in San Francisco. There are thousands of units not on the market, and it is one of the most expensive cities in the country to live in. Huh, I guess that worked. Please don't do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ronnie Lynn Antonio, followed by Gina Zari.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Rovi Lynn Antonio with the California Apartment Association. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak in front of you tonight. The proposal to enact a minimum lease in Half Moon Bay is nothing but just a backdoor to just cause eviction. The proposal and motivation for this ordinance, again, is a backdoor to just cause eviction. This circumvents the intent of AB 1482. The legislature's intent is for just cause eviction to begin after 12 months, not at day one. This was intentional to help protect the small housing providers and allow for the two parties, the housing providers and the renters, to see if this business relationship is going to work before a lifetime tenancy starts. Because after month 12 of AB 1482, the tenant is locked in for life. At the last meeting, I think you guys had a discussion about the demographics of your housing providers in the city. Almost all, except for one owner, is a mom and pop. They're all small property owners. This ordinance that's before you tonight is going to hurt those small mom and pop housing providers. I think Mr. Ralph Ely made a great statement this evening about how this minimum lease is actually going to hurt people like him and hurt those who are actually true affordable housing providers by giving marginalized renters an opportunity to live in Half Moon Bay by not running up the cost of renting, by not doing expensive credit checks and other background screening process that in other cities renters are subjected to. That's not subjected here in Half Moon Bay because you have mom and pop housing providers, not corporate landlords. So again, I want to just have a reminder as our organization was present in all the discussions regarding AB 1482. Specifically on the just cause eviction, it was the legislative intent to have it start at after 12 months. This ordinance is going to contradict that intent, so please do not pass it tonight. A better approach is to focus on the second proposal, which is mediation. We have seen that it works. In some cities where we have done work, we've seen as high as 83, 85% success rate. This allows for communications and dialogue for two parties to continue and to resolve issues. I believe this is a good compromise for tonight. You've got two ordinances, minimum lease terms and mediation. Reject one, pass one, becomes a win-win situation. I'm also going to include another solution for you tonight, and that is to have a robust education on AB 1482 to help your housing providers. By helping your housing providers of what the laws are starting January 1, it also helps provide the renters, their residents, their neighbors, the new laws that's going to be provided to them in about 4 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Gina Zari, followed by Alice Lindmeyer.
Mayor, council members, Gina Zari, San Mateo County Association of Realtors. First, I want to thank council and staff for their intention and for how hard they've been working to provide protections, and for also changing this from tenant protections, which implies that they need to be protected from someone, the property owner, to rental protections. I appreciate that. Staff has worked incredibly hard. I have been incredibly impressed. And I've had individual meetings with some of the council members. I'm incredibly impressed with some of the pure desire to protect tenants. And that is impressive. And I understand that this is just an extension of that intention. What Roby talked about from the Apartment Association is that AB 1482, which you know we didn't support, you know we're not happy with. I'm trying to get my members here, hundreds of members here, and thousands of homeowners and property owners that they represent up to speed and catching up on AB 1482, this new statewide rent control law that includes just cause eviction and relocation payments. That is a task in and of itself. But when you take 1482 and you couple it with a 12-month mandatory required lease option, you've, what I said to staff is you've weaponized 1482. That's not good, because what it does is it takes the hands away from the property owners. It takes their ability to make decisions and judgment from them. You are stripping them of their choices. So when they might have, I have been incredibly impressed by some of our property owners, when they might offer a lease without doing a credit check. Do you think that would ever happen again with this ordinance in place? I can answer that for you now. Since Wednesday night, when I knew this was going to go forward until today, I've probably had 100 people call me from Half Moon Bay, property owners who said, I can't be there, please tell them that this is going to kill us. This is horrible because it doesn't give us the ability to make sure that that's a tenant I want to have a lifelong relationship with. And if I'm already going to be subjected to 1482, statewide rent control, I want to know that I'm going to be in a safe relationship. And there's one other piece that hasn't really been touched on that I need to remind you of, and that's just cause eviction. We've fought rent control and just cause eviction in 3 different jurisdictions and defeated it by more than 60% of the vote. And the reason being is the just cause eviction piece. When someone commits an act and has a neighbor that has to endure that, the neighbor is not going to go to court to report it. 90+% of the time it doesn't happen. So the neighbor has to live with the bad action of his or her neighbor. That's the part that you guys have to understand occurs. And that 12-month period is so critical to allowing that tenant and the landlord to determine if that's a safe relationship for the other tenants. So please think about the marginalized tenants that are going to be affected by this. And again, thank you very much for all of your hard work and your intention.
Thank you. Alice Linsmeyer, followed by Joaquin Jimenez.
Good evening. I just want to thank you so much for working on many ways to address this crisis. It's great that the state is seeing a trend and a need to address the crisis, and I'm really grateful. I know this is long in coming also with you with the 3 years of listening sessions, et cetera. And the issue is the stability piece that I'm seeing. Not only as a member of the Latino Council do we meet regularly and hear story after story about people who have to leave really amazing contributors to our community because people have taken advantage of being able to sell a house at a higher than market rent and suddenly are without housing. And then personally, you know, families, I just had one mom called me tonight just because she wanted to make sure my daughter was being picked up, but she's a huge contributor to the church. She's a huge contributor to the school. Her husband was born and raised here, and they have had to move 3 times in 2 years, and every time they have to move, it's a Herculean task to get someone to be able to get rent to them. So I really appreciate you looking for measures that would offer stability to families and to the kids who are being lost in this whole shuffle around the housing market and the housing crisis. And I really want to reinforce this idea of stability and trust. Like I know that there's a lot of great landlords out there who are looking at trust. We need to rebuild the trust in the community by way of relationship and by way of stability and longevity and the mediation. I really commend you on looking into mediation. I've seen that really work in many different places. So I just want to thank you and I want you to continue going forward with looking for every measure possible so that there can be more stabilities for the families here who are contributing so much to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Joaquin Jimenez, followed by J.D. Anagnosto, I think.
Good evening. Well, I was waiting for this. I remember a couple years ago, I came in with at least 300 signatures from community members, asking for this rent control. So I want to thank you. I mean, I heard today a lot of stories, a lot of people came in, one story. I got over 100 stories of those about community members that have been here for 20 years. They had to relocate. They could not afford to be here. Rents went up a little bit too much for our community. We've been losing families, 30, 50 families a year at least, cannot afford to be here. Increasing rents $1,000 in 3 months. I do know people that are landlords and they do rent, and they're not here today, right? Because they're the Latino community. We have Latino members in the community that own property and they do rent and they do affordable housing on their own. That's why you don't see them here. They're trying to help the community member make a living. Making $11.50 an hour, you think we can be able to afford $3,000 of rent? Not even with 2 jobs. Think about it. You're crying because you know you're gonna make less money. We're losing family members. And you worry about because you're gonna make $2,000 less? Come on. How many Latino members that own property you see here today? None. And I know a lot of them. They do rent. Last year we have an article in the paper, thanks to Eric, did research. We have families, 2 or 3 families living in a 2-bedroom apartment. You think that's fair? You think that's fair? I don't think it's fair. So having this, 12-month lease is nothing. If it was me, I'd be asking for more. Why? Because our community needs it. It is not about being communist. You bringing politics into this. This is not about politics. It's about being human. What do you know about communism? You will not be able to survive in a communist country. So please do not bring politics into this. It's about losing our community members, about losing our families, or friends, or neighbors. People that serve us on the restaurants, work in the farms. 12-hour shifts at the farms. How many of you can do it? It is not because they want to be there. They didn't have an education. Some of the community members can barely write and read. So what do you expect? So I want to thank you. You have my support. We're going to do mediation. I'm ready for it. Some of the community members could not be here because they have to work a second job. I had to leave, early from work to be here. But I'm ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Joaquin. JD, I'm sure I'm going to butcher this. Anagnosto?
That's pretty good.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you.
Followed by John Ullum.
Yeah, Anagnostio, but that's
Anagnostio.
pretty much right on the money. Thank you for allowing me to speak, honorable council members. I just wanted to say that us as landlord, I've been a landlord for 35 years. I own property here on the coast as well. I just look at the numbers on the board, and it seems like it's preferential. It's discretionary in terms of how you chose what you chose. And so therefore, the majority of the housing, which could be a combination of owner-occupied, which is the houses, and those can be part-time houses as well, since that's a big equation here too on the coast. You're punishing, seems to be one group of people, one small group of people. And I think us as landlords are very decent people. It really matters to us who rents our places. We really care for them a lot. I have tenants that I've had for 40 years, the same tenant. She's 80 years old. I am not planning to increase her rent by something that's disrespectful. And I have Latinos as well, and I could understand how that man feels as well too. But that should be left to us, not to you. You should allow us to be decent human beings, which we are, which most of us here are, that take care of our tenants and our properties so that we can have the flexibility in the event that things need to change and warp into a different situation, especially here on the coast. I no longer can have nurses live in my place. They have a 13-week stint. Can't happen anymore. They're out. They have to find someone else to live. And so forth and so on. So just think about that. And the unintended consequence of this has been mentioned before, is now that we have caps, what are we to do? You're mandating us now to increase rent. I used to go 3-4 years to keep it comfortable and then have a modest increase. Now I'm possibly compelled to have to increase every single year. I don't really like having to have that option or be forced to do that option. So, thank you.
Thank you. John Ullum, followed by Heidi Frank.
John Ullum, Half Moon Bay. This is a really hard question. You know, as landlords, I used to do a lot of property repair. I've seen things that you would not believe, but I know you have all seen it. People that you counted on to take care of your properties, destroy them. Someone's got to pay to fix that, and it's going to be the tenants that move in. That is the way it is. On the other hand, I know people who had jobs, who are making a living, they're on the edge, and they're on the street now. And people aren't really talking about them. And there's no one bad here because of that. I know a lot of landlords, and they're good people. And the people I work with are mom and pops, the kind of people that look you in the eye and say, you got to leave, or I'm going to do this for you, or I'll give you this break this month. So I get why a lot of them are upset, because they rightly feel that they're pictured as the bad guy here. And I've heard references to communists and blaming it on people who didn't want houses built back in the 70s. But I can tell you, I know Trump voters up in Moss Beach who resist density, that don't want any more houses built, and don't care about property rights. They don't want no more people. There are 13.5 million homes in California, residences. Got it off the internet, must be close. And I find some numbers that say we're about 3.5 million houses short. So what that sounds to me is that every community in California needs to build about 25% more houses. They got to make a mix, but they need 25% more, and we don't need any more Ocean Colony, and we don't really need anything that's been developed. We need small, affordable houses that people can make the payments on with the kind of jobs that are being created in today's economy. And I guarantee you that if you said we were going to build 25% more housing units in Half Moon Bay, you'd see a lot of property owners who live in Half Moon Bay up here saying, no, we don't want that. We don't want that in our community. We don't want that density in our community. And there's a lot of liberals and what would you call progressives in this community who agree that we need 25% more houses, but we need them on the other side of the hill, that we don't need them here. Which is why people like Jimenez wonder where they fit in all this, because this community doesn't exist unless you get people in here doing the jobs that all of us don't do. And I hope you all think about who is responsible for this and where the real answer lies. You can make a lot of regulations, and I can understand why they don't want you telling them 3 months rent, 12 months rent. That makes sense. But that is not going to solve this problem. To solve this problem, you're going to have to drive down the cost of these people's rental units. And the way to do that is build more housing. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Heidi Frank?
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I actually live in El Granada, but I see that this could present precedents to expand to other areas. We already have rent control in the state. You know, Half Moon Bay could start this, and we actually have enough property on our lot to build an ADU. And my husband and I talked about putting an ADU and renting it to a teacher or a fireman or someone who otherwise might be living somewhere else because they can't afford to live here. But if we don't have a choice to, you know, if we don't have that 12-month period of time to see if that renter, you know, whether it be a teacher or a fireman or a Hispanic person who can't otherwise rent anywhere else, we might reconsider that, building an ADU and creating a rental for people like that if we can't have a period of time to decide whether they're a good fit for a forever tenant, which is what you're proposing. And after a year, they already become a forever tenant. So if they have to do it in the beginning, then we'll rethink that and probably not opt to do a rental. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in the public hearing? I close the public hearing and bring it back to council. That's you. That's you. No?
I was curious if staff had any, can we ask if that react?
What's that?
I was curious if staff could
Sarah.
react to some of the concerns raised.
Sure. We noted a couple of things that we wanted to provide some clarifying information on. So first on the question of ADUs and accessory dwelling units, our intent is to exempt those. Perhaps we could make that more clear in the ordinance, but that is the intent. And so a number of concerns were raised tonight about what it would be, what the effect of this ordinance would be for folks that are living on the same lot and the same parcel as a tenant in an ADU, and our intent was to exempt those from the minimum lease terms. The second is a clarification. A comment was made about this being the first city, or being the first city to impose minimum lease terms, and we did want to note that there are a number of other jurisdictions in San Mateo County that have minimum lease term provisions, including Redwood City, Mountain View, Palo Alto, so we're not the first. I wanted to make a reminder that the tenant does not need to accept the 12-month rental. So if you have someone that's a nurse that's looking for a 13-week rental, or a teacher that's looking for a 9-month rental, that is fine. The tenant can reject the first 12-month lease and say, look, I'm really only looking for something for a shorter time, and at that point is when folks could negotiate. There was a question about what happens if there's a disaster that ruins a home, and sort of what happens to the tenant. This is covered under 1482, but if there's a need for substantial renovations or repairs, that's an option for a just cause eviction, and so you don't have to keep the person there or pay for them to get another rental somewhere else or anything like that. That's covered not in this ordinance, but in 1482. I also did want to make clear that a couple of things that were brought up in public comment are things that, so namely sort of the requirement for relocation assistance and the rent caps. Again, those are from the state law. Those are not being imposed by this ordinance. I do want to make clear that the ordinance will make the imposition of 1482 more likely because it will trigger it more frequently, but the requirements themselves come from state law. I also want to respond to comments about the sort of intent of 1482 and the state legislature's intent to keep this year open for there to be a negotiation or a trial period, so to speak. 1482 also, however, does specifically leave the door open for local jurisdictions to impose more stringent requirements. It was a negotiation that was reached as to what the state law did, but the state law very clearly states that local jurisdictions can impose more stringent requirements if desired. And so I don't believe this runs afoul of an intent from the state legislature. Finally, in terms of, there was a question about whether this is too preferential and we sort of cast too narrow of a net on the types of units that this applies to. I do want to note that this mirrors the exemptions that the state legislature created in 1482. However, that's not something that's mandated by state law. With certain exceptions, you could cast a broader or narrower net as desired. I wanted to turn it over to Bill to address just the urgency ordinance question.
Sure. So this, because the law that was passed by the state was not urgency, so it's enacted for January 1st, a number of jurisdictions did address that with their own urgency ordinances to bring some of the 1482 into effect immediately. And those were the county, the city of San Mateo, Menlo Park, Redwood City, Daly City, San Carlos, and South San Francisco.
And I think that's it on our end. We're happy to answer other questions that you might have, but those are some of the comments and clarifying questions we wanted to make in response to public comment.
I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that we have some idea of the number of units that would actually be impacted by this proposed ordinance. I think that's really a step in the right direction. We know what we're talking about, because until recently, we really didn't have a handle on that. So I appreciate staff's work in getting those numbers to us, so thank you. Deborah, you want to say something?
Yeah, this is a hot and heavy topic. I appreciate everything I've heard tonight from public comment. But I am coming down on the side of the tenants that have had rental increases that have been astronomical over the past, not 1 year, but 5 years, getting worse all the time. We are losing people. We have help wanted signs everywhere in Half Moon Bay because nobody can afford to live here, even if they could afford to live on the amount of wages that they got. I am for the ordinance. If it were up to me, the rental increase would be capped at 7%, not 10%. I think that if you have a bad tenant, then you have just cause eviction. It's that straightforward. If you just don't like the person, that's not a reason to get rid of the tenant. So I don't see that as an argument. So I'm in favor of the ordinance.
I'm also in favor of the ordinance. I appreciate all the input. I haven't heard from many tenants here. I'm not sure.
Please, no comments from the audience.
I've been a landlord. I understand the concerns. I'm not sure how this will kill below market rate rentals. As a landlord, I was always able to rent for the amounts that I wanted. I was also, like Ralph Ely's story, if I heard correctly, you've been renting units for 47 years, is that right? No credit checks. Or a couple, yeah, but very few, yeah. And 47 years, with a handshake, a few credit checks, only 2 evictions were necessary. So, I'm always, in these kind of determinations, I'm always trying to weigh, the benefits versus the risks. And right now, in our current housing emergency, and knowing folks who have been priced out of the rental market, I see the benefits of this ordinance outweighing, even though I do understand some of the risks some of the time. So I support this ordinance. Thanks.
Thank you, Joaquin. It's clear that there's no obvious win-win here. I had 18 speaker cards from people in the real estate and rental market. 2 people spoke in favor of the tenants. From my perspective, the main issue is one of equity and stability, that I think a tenant who knows that he or she can have a 12-month lease is something that gives a sense of stability. Nobody is forcing anybody to raise rents or have long-term, longer than a year lease. But I think, on balance, having the minimum lease requirement is is an equitable thing and something that we should support. So I'm also in favor of the ordinance. Oh, may I have a motion, please? It's right in front of you.
I move that we waive the first reading and approve the introduction of an ordinance enacting Chapter 7.70 as part of the Half Moon Bay Municipal Code with a revision to 70.020.f, adding the exception 13, rental of any mobile home or site within a mobile home park.
Second. I'd like to have a roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Brownstone,
I approve.
Councilmember Penrose,
Aye.
Mayor Rohrbach,
Yes,
motion carries.
thank you all. You want 5 minutes? Okay. Let's take 5 minutes to allow people to leave who wish to leave. We'll meet back here at 10 of 9. Please take your seats. Oh.
I'll go around and get it.
I took the under 10, jeez.
Let's hope. The last item on our regular agenda is item 3A, the loan of an affordable housing funds for the proposed Abundant Grace Workforce Development Center at 515 Kelly. Staff report.
Thank you, Mayor, honorable council members. Matthew Chittister, your Deputy City Manager. Pleased to be here to share this item with you tonight. I'll give you a little bit of background. I know that you've heard this pretty recently, so I won't spend a ton of time on my presentation. The first part of my background, I just want to share with you a little bit on the Affordable Housing Fund that the city has. We currently have $2.47 million in our Affordable Housing Fund. That's a combination of mostly affordable housing in lieu fees from developments, but as part of your budget allocations for this fiscal year, you added $400,000 from the general fund. And as you know, on the consent agenda tonight, you adopted the allocation guidelines for the use of this fund, and I think we're all looking forward to proposals coming forward to utilize some of this funding for affordable housing development here in Half Moon Bay. The proposal that we're here to talk about tonight is from Abundant Grace Coastside Worker. As you know, this is a local nonprofit that provides services and support to families and individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty here on the coastside. A couple of the major things that they do, of course, is regular breakfasts at the Lutheran Church that anyone's invited to that is seeking a warm meal and some companionship. The Coastal Cleanup Team, which is a partnership between the city and Abundant Grace that employs individuals, mostly homeless individuals, and helps to keep our beaches and some of our main streets clean and looking good for our community. And the third program is their farm worker program, where they actually go to a farm and pay these individuals to work the farm, and then the food that is harvested on that farm is then distributed to those in need. So this is really a nonprofit that's involved in a lot of things in our community. They're a great partner with the city in all areas of working with the homeless and providing for members of the community. And what they've proposed is to create a workforce development center. It's to take the work that they're doing right now and expand it and provide kind of a home base for these programs. So some of these programs include employment, life skills development, and then some of the basic needs that especially individuals experiencing homeless don't currently have, which is storage of their personal goods, opportunity to take showers and get laundry, things that I think a lot of us take for granted. So in this case, Abundant Grace is an escrow for the purchase of 515 Kelly Avenue. This is the former Senior Coastsiders thrift store property, just about a half a block away from us here. And just for context, it's near the corner of Highway 1 and Kelly Avenue, right behind the More for Less gas station. And on the other side of the property is the AT&T service center. Behind them is the Coastside Clinic in this property, and then they're directly across the street from Bike Works, and adjacent to that is Cunha Middle School and the Boys and Girls Club / Cabrillo Unified School District Event Center. So for this acquisition, they've negotiated a purchase price of $925,000, and then they estimate another $200,000 will be necessary to make renovations and purchase what we call furnitures, fixture, and equipment, FF&E, to create this workforce development center. So they're looking to raise $1,125,000 for this project. Their focus on fundraising and through a private loan is $525,000. They've received a loan from the county already of $300,000, and they've, of course, requested from the city a loan of $300,000 to get the financing they need to make this purchase and do these renovations. So on October 15th, this item was brought for discussion before the council, and at that meeting, the council created some conditions before considering a loan to support this project. The main conditions were a request that Abundant Grace do community outreach and make sure that the surrounding community and other members of our community were aware of the project and could provide feedback. So the engagement that's happened is, of course, presentations here to the City Council, a presentation at a Cabrillo Unified School District Board meeting, and at the request of the Cunha Parent-Teacher Organization, a presentation was made and an opportunity to gather feedback as well. In addition to that, the council required that before we would consider a loan, that the land use entitlements and permits were obtained. And on November 12th, the Planning Commission approved the conditional use permit and other land use requirements, and the appeal period for that ended on November 26th, and there were no appeals. So the loan terms that are being proposed for a city contribution include very similar terms to what the county offered to Abundant Grace, a 15-year term that bears no interest, and payment is deferred till the expiration of that term. One caveat is there would be early repayment required if the property was sold or if Abundant Grace ceased to provide these types of services out of that property. Other special conditions that the city would impose include requirement of additional services and education programs. Some of the ones specifically that we've talked about are good neighbor programs and opportunities for people to focus on getting into permanent housing. And if the city were to go forward with a safe parking program, Abundant Grace would assist in the development and management of that type of a program. And a safety and security program or plan was required. That's been received. It includes fencing, gates and fencing around the entire property, security lighting, and security cameras surrounding the property. In addition to that, Abundant Grace has met with the Sheriff's Office to talk about some of the things they can do to ensure the safe use of the property for themselves and for their neighbors. Some of the prohibited activities in the loan agreement, some of which are already in the land use approvals, include a prohibition on overnight sleeping or parking at this property, as well as a prohibition on for-profit activities at this property. And one of the final things that we're requiring is that before Abundant Grace hires any workers, that they would identify and then assist those individuals with resolving any outstanding warrants or legal issues that might create a need for law enforcement to be involved in their operations. So we propose that this loan be made out of the Affordable Housing Fund, and in order to do that, there are certain findings that the City Council has to make. First of all, we have to understand the status of the Affordable Housing Fund, and currently we have a balance of $2.47 million in that fund. This would draw $300,000, leaving $2.17 million remaining in the Affordable Housing Fund, and we find that that is sufficient for being able to support other affordable housing projects in Half Moon Bay. This needs to be found consistent with the guiding principles, and this project leverages other funding by drawing on private donations and a private loan, as well as the loan that they've received from the county. It supports an at-risk population, specifically individuals that are at risk of homelessness or already experiencing homelessness. And they've proven to run successful programs here locally through the work that they've been doing over the last several years. Confirmation of eligible use, support for homelessness prevention is an eligible use within our affordable housing allocation guidelines. And the final finding is confidence that the funded use will be realized. And as has been mentioned, Abundant Grace is a partner with the city on a variety of programs, and they've been very successful in the work that they've done. We've seen a lot of success stories, individuals going from these subsidized type work programs into permanent work, unsubsidized work, as well as individuals that have been placed in permanent housing through the efforts of Abundant Grace. So we do anticipate that this program would be successfully implemented if the city were to provide the loan. So our recommendation is to adopt a resolution authorizing a loan of affordable housing funds not to exceed $300,000 to Abundant Grace Coastside Worker to contribute toward the purchase of the property to be used for a workforce development center, and authorizing the city manager to execute the loan agreement. Before we get to questions, I wanted to ask Eric DeBode, the Executive Director of Abundant Grace, to provide a short presentation on the work that they're doing and how they plan to run this center, which I think will help guide some of the discussion we have on this item. Eric?
Thank you. Is this on? Good evening, council members. Thank you very much for your partnership in so many ways over the last several years. I can't thank you enough for envisioning the Coastside Clean Team. I think Harvey went to San Jose to look at their Clean Streets program. I went with the help of Maida Townsley, who used to work with them, and she's now on our board. But that program in particular helped to solidify our mission identity and our charism. And it's taken several years. As you may know, we started just picking up leftover donations from Potrero Nuevo Farm, and eventually they envisioned us doing more there, and we got a grant to hire some people. And, it was just one step after another. It became clear that employment was a really key piece for folks who are struggling with homelessness. It's a piece that I had never endeavored to do before this. For 30 years, I've just been doing, soup kitchen and shelter and food and clothes and all that kind of stuff. But this has been very eye-opening and transforming for me personally. Thankfully, we've grown roots in this community over the last 8 years. We've developed relationships with all of the churches, with Rotary Club and Lions Club, who volunteer with us and donate to our work. This year, we've hired over 70 people during the course of the year. We've paid out well over $60,000 in payroll to folks who are experiencing homelessness. But tonight, I want to share about our new program, an additional program that we started just a couple of months ago, which is that we take a small group of people, 5 people, and we take them an extra day of the week down to the farm, and we do special programming. We do mindfulness meditation, and then development of their personality, identity, accountability, and responsibility. And we've had great participation. Karen Hoffman has come to do mindfulness meditation. Gretchen Megan has done some presentations on personality development. Linda Galindo, who's an extraordinary presenter, did a whole series on accountability and responsibility. And it's been spectacular. The second 2 hours on the farm, Jay Trexler, who is the farm manager with his wife Susie, they've developed a curriculum to teach people more in depth about farm work, and have worked with them to do a process where they identify a project, they write out how they're going to do it, they study it, and they complete it. So whatever we're doing in that program has had an incredible outcome. And as I have been nearing the holiday, I've been mulling over, the reports that we've got on, the numbers of people, and Jay's been helping me and our board to go over what some of the outcomes are. And I'm telling you, in the last couple of months, it has been extraordinary. And I want to share this with you. I've got some sense about what it is, but I want to share, there's one guy who's worked with us on and off for years. He finally went into a residential treatment program for alcoholism, and he's doing great. Just called me a little over a week ago to check in. It's like he's got a brand new life. One other person continues their journey on sobriety, and he was hired as a truck driver. He just called me on Thanksgiving to say hello. He's doing great too. He has family in Half Moon Bay, but he's truck driving in Utah. Another woman went back to community college to study a trade that she wants to pursue. One of our guys, we helped him write up a resume and a letter of recommendation, and he applied at Ace Hardware. Joyce and I drove him to his first day of training over the hill. He's now employed here at Ace Hardware, and he found a second job as a caregiver, and he found housing. Another guy is a veteran, and we were able to connect him to Veteran Services, and he has housing now in Redwood City. E and C, two other people have gotten sober thanks to a new medication that's administered by our county's mobile street team that provides medical services for the homeless. And these guys have been sober for over a month. It's nothing short of miraculous to see how a medical treatment can really help people get sober. You know, we're all familiar with AA and those processes and kind of the focus on the interior, but it's pretty amazing to see a medical solution that can be coupled with therapeutic advances as well. There's another couple who was here from out of town. They got a voucher and went back to Central California to live. Another guy came to us one day in tears at the farm, needed to quit drinking. We helped him get into a program outside of Sacramento. He did this 90-day program, and he's now back. I just saw him at a local store where he got hired for a job. He was beaming with happiness. We have another person who works with us who saved her money and bought a used vehicle that she can live in. Two other people saved their money and bought a waterproof tent where they can get ready for the winter. Another guy found a full-time job. Kay found a room to rent in exchange for work. Another woman was very sick, diagnosed with cancer. One of our volunteers here, Ariel, took her into her house, cared for her for a month until she was able to move into housing over by senior housing. She moved into affordable housing just recently, and I was at her place this morning to see how things were going there. What does this show? These stories show that people experiencing homelessness want to work. They want to make changes in their lives. They want to improve themselves and more. But let's talk about the people that we fear. We are all concerned about violent crime and sex offenders. People have raised concerns about the location of the center being too close to the Boys and Girls Club and the middle school, and right on the walking path where children go to More for Less to buy snacks before or after school. I've been in dialogue, as Matthew mentioned, with law enforcement, with Saul and also a detective over the hill who works on sex offender cases, to open the channel of communication about any concerns that we or other people in the community have about the safety of children, as well as the general public. Anyone with restrictions on them regarding proximity to the school will not be allowed to come to the center. I've also consulted with other nonprofits and received assistance from Life Moves in crafting our own policy on sex offenders for the new center. I've had open communication with other organizations as well, and I'm serious about the safety of children. Structurally, we've done everything we can to eliminate loitering out in front. Our architect is here tonight, and he can vouch. We've really gone through the whole property to ensure no loitering, that people will not be allowed to wait out front. They will enter the facility through the driveway and walk to the backyard to the main entrance of the building. The backyard will be landscaped for people to gather for work. A local church has volunteers who have said they will come in the morning and do hospitality in front. They'll have coffee, they'll stand out there, they'll greet workers and direct them inside, and keep an eye on kids walking to school. We will be vigilant, and we will report any suspected child abuse to law enforcement. We've been meeting at More for Less for 4 years, right out in the open. No walls, no fences, no management of the site at all. We're there at 8 a.m., 10 a.m., we return at 1:45 p.m., and we never had any incident whatsoever. And I think it's important that we get to know the homeless community so we don't fear them. We know their names, their struggles, their dreams. And as we get to know folks, we find out that they are quite a bit like us. They have had, perhaps, more childhood trauma, substance abuse history, mental health issues than you or I. But the option for a city and a community to do nothing and hope the problem disappears has been tried and failed. But we can create a safe, managed workforce site with case management and lots of supervision. We can accompany people on the hard journey toward maturity and well-being, responsibility, and freedom. And as we have shown in the recent past, we can continue to see people rise, make changes in their lives, and contribute to society in wonderful ways. So tonight I'm asking you to approve funding for programming that works. I really think we all share the same goal, which is to work hard to try to address the situation of homelessness. Abundant Grace has seen some great results from people who have really pushed themselves to make changes in their lives. You can trust us that we will do much more with the Workforce Development Center. I want to close by saying thank you for your trust in me and in our organization. I feel it deeply, and it's no small request that we are making from the city and from our community. On our part, I'm keenly aware that we will need to perform for you and for our community. I want to share what I have heard from the homeless community. They feel trusted. You know, I've been meeting with them for months, talking about this possible center, talking about my interactions with each of you and how we've met and we've worked together. They feel valued in ways they've never felt before. They feel welcomed through this process. I've had meetings with them regularly, and you know, they're moved that the city cares enough to fund the Coastside Clean Team, and even more so to consider helping with the purchase of 515 Kelly for a workforce development center. It's been very affirming and even healing for some of these folks. They bear scornful and judgmental looks all too often. In Half Moon Bay, they are also treated with great care and concern by a large number of neighbors who understand that we are all related and that the well-being of all is improved when those who struggle the most are given support and opportunity. So thank you very much. Thank you for helping us give opportunity a new address. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I have 3 public comment cards. Joyce Shanahan, followed by Aline Zenger.
Hi, I'm Joyce, and I work half-time for Abundant Grace Coastside Worker. I write the grants, and I help out with the farm program. What brought me to Abundant Grace is probably no different than what brought so many supporters to the past few council meetings. Eric DeBode. I got to know Eric by chance when I saw a flyer for a presentation over at Oddfellows last March. I decided to take a look at the organization. It looked somewhat interesting, but I have to tell you, after 25 years in the not-for-profit world, I was a bit cynical. There's a lot of great-sounding programs that just don't live up to their hype. What I found so amazing that night was not only Eric's passion and commitment to those he serves, but the fact that he stepped aside and he let the homeless do the talking. That was really very rare. Who was this guy? Well, after 9 months of working closely with Eric and those that he serves, I'm still asking that same question. And I'm still trying to figure that out. Who is this guy that can bring out the best in people, whether they're a group of people experiencing homelessness or the top executives at the Rotary Club? Who is this guy who, when no one's watching, is constantly working 24/7 to assist people in need? Whether it's hauling furniture or jumping a car, mine, finding them a new sleeping bag, whatever it is, he's willing to do it. He makes himself available seemingly 24 hours, 7 days a week, as I'm sure Alice knows well. Well, I can't say I figured out the answer to that question of who Eric is, but whatever is behind his zest and zeal for life, I really hope that it's catchy. It sure seems to be, judging by the support I see him get everywhere he goes. Of course, Eric would be the first to say that this program is about much more than one person. It's about those who live in our neighborhood, our neighbors, those who are really looking for connection, seeking an opportunity, and in many cases, as I found firsthand, some people just really needing to be seen. Some of our workers, as Eric told you, have taken full advantage of the program. They found jobs, they found housing, they found sobriety, and a whole lot more. Others benefit simply by having some cash in their pockets and a place, and a routine that they can go into however many days a week they decide to. And what I found, and the lesson that I'm learning every day, the most important thing for us and the culture that Eric has created is to meet people wherever it is that they're at. And I really appreciate this opportunity to put that into action. And I know it's going to be a shared effort and a great success. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce. Aline Zanger, followed by Ed Love.
Good evening, council members. I speak in support of this loan. I think the city has done its due diligence. The conditions are very prudent from a very fiscal standpoint, which I appreciate as a taxpayer. And I know from having met many of the people experiencing homeless that are part of this program, the stability that it provides is going to send them forward in life in a way that very few programs can do anywhere. So I very much support what you're doing, and thank you for the due diligence you've done to get us this far.
Thank you. Ed Love.
Good evening, Mayor Rarbach and council members Penrose and Brownstone. This whole process with Abundant Grace has gone through very efficiently and speedily. And I'd just like to recognize the people who have been responsible for creating that very quick process. Of course, Eric DeBode, who's been an inspiration to us all, number one. Barbara LeVay, our real estate expert. And Brian Bodis is not here tonight, but he's going to be our construction person, Bodis Construction. And of course, Bob Nesbitt, city manager, and his deputy manager, Matthew Chittister. And also Jill Ekus, planning staff, and Doug Garrison, of course. And last but not least, an enlightened planning commission, excuse me, and city council. This loan is a very good thing, and I heartily recommend that the council approve it. If every community had an Eric DeBode and all the people that were responsible for getting the process done quickly and efficiently were in every community in the Bay Area, there wouldn't be any more housing crisis in the Bay Area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Questions? Comments? None. Go for it.
So I greatly appreciate, Eric, what you've done for the community in this particular project in particular. And I also appreciate that you did reach out to a number of constituencies. Everything went through smoothly at the Planning Commission. No one spoke in opposition. No one at our two meetings here on this topic has spoken in opposition. And I also appreciate that I know when you went to the PTO meeting, it was probably one of the first times you actually heard some concerned parents speak about their fears and concerns. And you articulated them well. You know, people are afraid of, and it's all about location. We've received a number of letters as council members from some concerned parents, and every letter prefaced, I think this is a great project. I think it's fantastic. But some people have some concerns about the location. And I understand how people's fears, you know, when you're in a fear mode, the blood rushes from your head, and you can't always have all the blood you need to think everything through, and fears can kind of take over your whole mental state. And especially when it involves people's children and fears of a population. I mean, it is not a crime to be homeless. And sometimes that population, there are folks who have mental health issues, drugs, et cetera, all the things you've mentioned. So part of our due diligence is to allay those concerns. You know, always weighing the benefits and the risks. And part of our due diligence as a council is to make sure that we can allay those concerns. Not simply to say, well, the benefits outweigh all the risks. We want to make sure we understand from the public what they think the risks are, and then how we can allay those concerns. So both at the Planning Commission and here tonight, Eric, I did hear you reiterate that anyone who has restrictions on them based on past offenses, restrictions on how far or close they need to be from a public school, for example, won't be allowed on the premises. In addition to assuring that that won't happen, as part of the loan agreement also, there's a bit about vetting folks for outstanding warrants and resolving those warrants. So that's great. I've also been working with staff. I want to make sure you're successful, and I want to make sure we have a good process for assuring that we know how, if folks have warrants or if they have those restrictions. And staff, including our city attorney and the sheriff, and there's been some communications back and forth. And it hasn't been fully worked out yet to get that process in place, to make sure that we can get solid information to address those needs, to figure out who may or may not have those restrictions, where to get that information, to make sure that it's accessible. And we didn't realize, from what I've heard back from staff, didn't realize that there are some complications with that, making sure it's all legal, et cetera. So what I am proposing, it just feels like an important dot to I and T to cross in terms of parents, some concerns we received. I am proposing that we give staff a chance to work with Eric and the sheriff, et cetera, to figure out how to do that effectively, and that we take our final vote on this once we have that information. At our next meeting at December 17th, we'll have a full council there as well, to assure that we've covered that piece, and to make sure that nothing, by having that process in place, I think we will allay a lot of the concerns, and it'll make your job actually easier, Eric, to have the help of staff figuring out how to do that and get all that information. So that's what I'm proposing for tonight.
I was unaware that there was an issue there. So I'd like it to be better explained to me what the issue is.
Mr. Mayor and
Yes.
members of council, I I can explain what I just heard from Councilmember Brownstone, and it also relates to some conversations that we had. So what I heard, and the two examples that Mr. Brownstone gave, was in the loan document, for example, it says as a condition that Abundant Grace would work with any potential employees who have outstanding warrants to resolve those warrants before they were able to be an employee for them. That was one example. The second example I just heard was that Mr. Debody at the podium today made it clear that they would not employ anyone who was, or no one could come to the facility.
No one allowed on the site.
Facility
That's right.
if they had some legal restriction that did not allow them to be, say, within a certain distance of a school. So that would be breaking the law. And what we heard just now was Mr. Debody say that they would take all precautions and to make sure that that didn't happen. What I'm hearing is, how do we know that that in fact is happening? In other words, Mr. Debody can ask a potential employee, do you have any outstanding warrants? Mr. Debody can ask someone, do you have any restrictions on you? But in terms of knowing for sure that Abundant Grace is complying with those conditions, what I'm understanding is the only way we would do that is to get the information to know whether someone has those restrictions, get the information to know whether someone has warrants out for their arrest. That information is part of a criminal background that someone has. So those are records that you can obtain. For example, as an employer, the city does background checks on people. And as part of those background checks, and we do different background checks depending on the level of position, so there's different levels of how far a background check goes, but for sure, most background checks would include checking on the criminal record of an individual, and those can be obtained. And so the conversation that we have had has been around, could that be required, because then we would have a check to, in fact, work with Mr. Debody to prove that, yes, they were finding out the information of people who had warrants out for their arrest. They were getting the information of someone who might be on probation or parole who had restrictions placed on them, to guarantee that they were doing what you heard. So that, I think, is what I heard. That's conversations that we've had previously about some concerns of really, how do we check? When we can put these things in the loan document, we can put these conditions in there, but how do we actually then enforce them and make sure that they're making good? How do we know someone doesn't slip through the cracks, right? I mean, people break the law all the time, and you don't know they're breaking the law unless you catch them. And so I think that's what it gets at, and we have had some time to look into the legality of requiring that. We have not had the opportunity, though, to actually have that discussion with Mr. Debody. So, we'd want to certainly hear from him, like, how that might work, if that's something that would be acceptable to him. And there's also questions that came up of the difference. So what you heard today was several of the programs that is provided by Abundant Grace. Some of those programs actually employ homeless folks, and they're now on the payroll, and they are employees covered by certain laws. Other folks, though, they provide all kinds of services. They are a nonprofit who provides services to folks. These folks are not employees of Abundant Grace. And so some of the questions are around the differences between those categories and privacy rights with regard to background checks and obtaining that kind of information. So I would agree, if that was a direction that the council wanted to go, we as staff would need a couple more weeks to get that clear, work that out with Mr. Debody, get that into the actual loan agreement. We would not be able to put that in the loan agreement on the spot tonight. We just haven't answered all the questions, and this is something that Catherine has kind of advised us on as well, that we don't want to do this too quickly and not get it right. You'll notice that the draft loan agreement is not completed yet. It does have an exhibit. That exhibit, Exhibit B, is a series of performance measures that are expected of Abundant Grace as part of this loan. we haven't completed all of Exhibit B yet. So it's those kind of things that we would put in Exhibit B. Some of the things that you heard Mr. Debote say tonight, he went through kind of a laundry list of things he would do. We could take that write-up, for example, and put that in Exhibit B, and that would then be a part of the loan agreement. So that's another example of, if that was the direction of council, we as staff would need some more time to do that.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your comments and concerns. I just want to say, as a social service agency, my envisioning of this aspect of the loan agreement is that we would work with folks that are in our employ to review with them at their discretion what their law enforcement needs are in terms of resolving warrants and outstanding debt. So I'm happy to work with people on that, but I don't think it's appropriate for a social service agency, whether that's us or the medical clinic right around the corner or Centro Alcohol and Rehab Services right around the corner. We don't do law enforcement, right? But I will work with people to help them clear up those things. And Life Moves has a caseworker that comes out monthly and works with people who are homeless to resolve some of those issues. And I'm happy to go along with that, but we're also riding that line of, we don't want to disincentivize people who are trying to make an improvement in their lives, right? We want to support that in a way that allows them to clear up the wrongdoings of their past and get things clear and get things better in their lives, right?
My sense is that the thing that most people might be afraid of is a sex offender, a former sex, someone who has that as a history. And the question is then, how do you know that one of the people that you're employing that comes to the employment center is not a sex offender? So is that not a question you can ask that person, or is that not something you can do a background check on, or how does that work?
Yeah, so our policy is to review that information during intake and go to the Megan's Law website to see if anyone is on that list, which I did today and I do regularly. And in my conversations with the detective over the hill, we've kind of established that we will try to work together and have ways. There's things that he can't tell me that I need to know, and there are ways, that I can get a sense of someone who may or may not be a danger. So I think we'll be able to work together. If I have questions about anyone, I'm sure I can call him and ask, and he can respond in ways that are appropriate and legal to help us be clear.
If it might help, we actually have Detective Patterson from the Sheriff's Office who specializes in these types of crimes, and he's here to provide additional information if you have questions specifically around sex offenders. Is that something you'd like to?
My sense is that is the main concern that people have. When you're talking about distance from public schools, that's what you're talking about.
No, I recommend that if you have the chance to listen to him, he's very, very knowledgeable on this subject, and I found it very helpful to talk to him.
Yeah.
Okay. Detective Patterson, could you join us? And we really appreciate him coming tonight and sitting through the rest of the meeting to be, on call as a resource for us. So thank you, Detective, and maybe you can share a little bit about what you do and what you know, and then the council might have questions for you.
Thank you, Council. I've never been a part of one of these, so bear with me. Public speaking isn't my forte either. My name's Kyle Patterson. You don't mind if I just talk like this? Is that okay?
We do need you to talk into the mic because it's being broadcast.
Oh, okay. My name is Kyle Patterson. I am a detective with the Sheriff's Office. My partner in the back, Ron Darritsbini, is also a detective. Thank you for having us. I did speak with Erica a number of weeks ago and gave him what advice I could, and I can elaborate on that. My unit in Redwood City is composed of 12 detectives. We handle everything from your property crime to your major crimes. And then within that, there are a few of us that have some specialties, for lack of better words. Ron and I handle a lot of the child exploitation cases, sexual assaults. In addition to that, I am the sex offender compliance detective. I'll use the term 290 a lot when I refer to 290. That is the Penal Code section for sex offenders and the Sex Offender Registration Act. I could give you a little background about the sex offenders that are on the coast side, and then go into maybe some myths that are floating around, and maybe debunk some of those. Would that be beneficial, or would you like to just ask specific questions?
I think we're mostly concerned with what is relevant for Eric's proposal for the Workforce Development Center.
Sure. I did bring some facts. I do want to make it clear that I'm not here to voice my opinion and just give you the facts. A couple things that I do think that are notable to mention tonight is in 2006, there was a bill that was enacted, which I think a lot of us still believe is in effect, and that is that sex offenders, those on the 290 registration list, need to stay 2,000 feet or farther away from school grounds. In 2016, that actually was abolished. Sex offenders, per letter of the law, can actually be around school grounds. They can't be on the school grounds, but they can be on the perimeter of schools. Now, there is an exception to that, and that is 290 sex registrants who are on probation or parole, and there's explicit terms as part of their probation or parole that says, hey, you shall remain 2,000 feet or greater than that school area. So I just want to throw that out there as a fact. That is the case. I also think it's notable to mention the Megan's Law website. That is a public website. The Megan's Law website is directly integrated with the California Sex and Arson Registry database, which is what law enforcement provides information to. So as part of my duties, I register sex offenders, whether that's on a monthly or yearly basis, depending on if they're transient or they have an established residence. And that information is then uploaded to Megan's Law, which is public information. With that being said, not all sex offenders have disclosure clauses. There's three categories. Sex registrants either have full disclosure, that's where their name, their date of birth, their social security number, their offense, their address, everything, their photo is on Megan's Law. There's zip code only, the second tier, which is John Doe at 123 Main Street. John Doe lives in this zip code, and that's it. And then there is a non-disclosure category. So there is situations where sex offenders who register with me on a yearly basis or a 30-day monthly basis, that they may not show up on the California Sex and Arson Registry, on the Megan's Law database. And that is all dictated by the courts in sentencing. Those are the highlights. I'd be happy to provide those websites. If you have particular questions for me, I can do my best to answer them.
Well, thank you. No, that's helpful. And that was also my understanding, that not everyone might show up on Megan's Law website who may have a restriction or an issue of concern that's relatively current, depending on what they're convicted of, accused of, and the conditions. So, so you might have that information on the sex offender registry, but it wouldn't show up on Megan's.
For that particular category.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so yeah, so thank you. I appreciate that.
Welcome.
I think there are enough questions that have come up in the last half hour that staff needs to try to answer. So rather than have just the three of us make a decision about this loan, why don't we have staff research these issues and come back with recommendations in 2 weeks where we'll have the full council to vet the decision. Is that acceptable? Yes? Yes? No? Jeez.
I wish I was clear. I wish I understood what's going on better, but I don't. Eric stated that there would be nobody in the employment center who had any history of sex offense. Restrictions because of sexual offense. So that's good enough for me. If it's not good enough for the rest of council, then I'll have to go along with council. But I don't quite understand what the issue is.
Well, the issue for me is merely asking someone isn't enough. Asking the individual that we need to have some other database for knowing. And apparently there are some databases and some, maybe multiple, registration list. And so, and I also heard tonight that there's a few cities that have similar programs to Eric that we can do some benchmarking with as to how they handle. Because basically we're talking about some sort of screening process. We've used the word background check, we've used the word screening process, and each term frankly means something a little different is what I'm learning. So yeah, I'm a bit confused too. What's legal? Eric, I don't expect you to be, you know, an arm of law enforcement. However, this particular location has raised some concerns that create a little extra due diligence. But it's hard to do due diligence if we don't know what the heck the resources are that can make it easy to do that. So that's what I think staff is, you know, going to help us find out, what's out there, what people are doing around screening or background checks in similar situations. So that's how I'm understanding to try and clarify some of those various terms and what's legal and what's not and what that, you know, what that process could look like.
I would just like to say that I have had such an extraordinary experience the last several months, last several years, working with the folks that I work with, hearing the stories, dreaming up this idea, working with staff here. And I'm not at all surprised that there are fears and concerns about the location. I've been very surprised that we have not had one person come to the microphone at the first city council meeting, at the city planning commission meeting, and here. Not one person came up to stand in public and voice their concerns. This is a fear that's based in stereotypes that are wrong, that lead to more fear instead of the healing that is necessary for our community. I can't be more clear than that. Fear is difficult to work with because it's based in truth. And we're dealing with hypotheticals and things that can happen in the future, as Paulette said, the unintended consequences and outcomes that can happen. And all you can do is look at my track record and see what we've done. But still, I share your fear, right? Anybody with a brain shares concerns. The question is, are we doing due diligence? Are we working with law enforcement? Are we working with city council, the community, parents? You know, geez, we got a fence, we got lighting, we got security cameras, I got church volunteers standing out front to watch everything, you know? So I do hear your concerns, and I want to tell you, we are addressing those concerns, and those concerns among the homeless community, I am very inspired by the way people treat one another, help one another, stand up for each other, support each other. You know, if only more people could see and have the perspective that I've been gifted with, which is just, you know, spending time with people, and you see that they're the same as all of us, you know. You know, I don't know what the stats are about sex offenders, but my guess is, you know, it's a lot more dads and uncles and, you know, that sort of thing than homeless people, you know. It's really, you could maybe answer that question, you know. So it seems to me that I want us to, it's fine if you want to take more time so that we can coalesce around a plan that makes everyone feel that their concerns have been addressed. And I want to address those concerns, and I think that we have been addressing those concerns. There are issues around whether or not I can even do a background check, since we're not, I mean, we hire people at, you know, just on the day. They're not required to show up for work. They're not required to do anything. You know, I mean, all we do is go and we work at a farm and we clean up trash. They're, you know, in some ways, I mean, I don't offer them work. Only after I offer them employment, then I can do a background check legally. And, you know, it's cumbersome for us to do that every day with people. You know, I'm not sure, you know, the request is, I don't know, more than might be, well, it's more than necessary, you know, given the reality of what we encounter with folks, which has been that they're doing great things. You heard the list of everybody who's making movements in their lives. It's been extraordinary to watch. And I'm just a little disappointed, but I understand concerns, and I share your concerns deeply.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, just to clarify, if this again is the direction and the question posed by Councilmember Penrose of trying to understand what is being asked of staff and why we need more time. So I think some of the comments Mr. DeBode just made do illustrate why we would need more time. As I understand the request, and I'll try to put it in simple terms, right? We have this is a contract, this is a loan agreement that has certain requirements on both parties. If those requirements are the two examples that I gave, warrants out for their arrest, work with those employees, that laws are followed, as in all contracts, you want mechanisms in those contracts to enforce the contract. And I would agree that it would be nice if we lived in a world where everything was on a handshake, but that is just not how it works. And so what is being asked, as I understand it, is to look into the possibilities of getting the records that allow us to enforce the requirements that we were putting on them. And the example here was criminal records do exist. They are public records. And so the question, as I understand it, is can we put that in as a condition that those are obtained in some way, so that then the information is simply available. It would be provided to the city. We would just keep the records in a file. But Abundant Grace would then have those, and we would know that they had those so that they could then do the things that they said they were going to do. That's how I understand it. The reason we need the time, as you heard, there was questions about, given the manner in which Abundant Grace works, they hire people on the spot. It's a different process than maybe other types of employment. And then the point was also made by Mr. DeBote that there is a difference between the services they provide and the employees that they hire. And we agree with that, and this is a conversation that the city attorney and I had today. We are not clear right now on what we could require and what we could not require. So given that, I mean, I would agree if that's the direction you want us to at least look into that and bring back that information so you can make an informed choice, we would need the 2 weeks to do that. And then I would also just add the obvious here that given the conversation, there are 2 of your colleagues missing tonight. You know, maybe the whole conversation would benefit by their input too. And so that would be another reason we would have all that before you at the next meeting. So that's how I understand it. Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I understand that. And I guess my real question is, what business does the city have when it's not employing the homeless population? It is simply making a loan to a nonprofit organization. What business do we have deciding how to figure out what someone's background is? It seems to me it's not our business. It's our business as a city council to protect the public. And I think doing as much due diligence as we can, and if the sheriff says we can't do it 100%, then I believe we put up with not being able to do it 100%. We do it as well as we can. And we loan $300,000 to a nonprofit to do good work. The rest of it, getting into whether we can rely on Eric or not to figure out someone's character or background, is irrelevant. It's not our issue. So I think that's where I'm coming from. I'm happy with the 2 weeks because other council members have a different opinion than I do. So I'm fine with 2 weeks. But I just need to say that I don't think we're in the business of screening homeless folks. That's what Eric does.
I guess I would frame that a bit differently. I feel that Eric shouldn't have to solely rely on his judgment. He can't read minds, that we want a process where he can get information. And you're right, it might not, due diligence doesn't necessarily mean 100% perfect solution. In fact, there's a pretty clear example of a school employee that many people might be familiar with where that person was vetted working in the school. No, you do not get a 100% perfect answer. But if you have a process that can hopefully give us, 80%, whatever, I don't even want to put a number on it. But again, allaying concerns, as you said, our job is to take in public comment and allay concerns. And it's true, Eric, we didn't have people necessarily come and speak in front of this publicly. They felt okay in the smaller confines of that parent-teacher organization meeting that you went to. So you did hear people speak. What allows someone to get over their fears to speak publicly here where they're taped and recorded, can really differ. So I can't answer that question. But yeah, I think if anything we can do to allay some of those concerns and remove some of that fear to help you, remove some of that fear. We're not going to remove 100% of the fear. There will be folks who, no matter what we say and we're doing due diligence, will still have some of that fear. But I would love to provide an opportunity, for staff to get some more detail on a process, and hopefully that will allay a significant amount of those fears and concerns. So thank you for your patience. I do understand the disappointment that we might not be voting tonight, and appreciate, your patience to wait a couple of more weeks. And I think we'll have something in place by then. Thanks.
Are you clear on what needs to be presented to us in 2 weeks?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. Could you repeat the question? I was
Okay.
having a quick side conversation with the city attorney.
No, that's fine. I asked if it's clear to you what needs to be presented to council in 2 weeks about Eric's proposal.
Yeah, let me summarize it again, because I think we do want to be crystal clear on this.
Okay.
So what I heard was a request to look into the requirement of requiring Abundant Grace to get and then provide criminal background checks on, and this is maybe the part where I'm not clear, either their employees and their clients, or both. And I think I'd like to be crystal clear on that. And then we will come back with a modified staff report that indicates the exact language, if we're what we found out in our analysis, what we were able to agree on or not agree on with Mr. DeBote, because some of these things may be negotiable, and as you've already heard, he has some reservations about some of them. So we would come back with the analysis of what the law allows, what it doesn't allow, what we can do, what we can't do, what Mr. DeBote would accept, what he wouldn't accept, and then hopefully we would also include some language that could, if the council desired, be included that addresses that concern of having a check so that these conditions can be enforced. So that's what I heard that we're supposed to do, and the only part I'm missing is whether we should look into employees, clients, or both, because I think there is legally a difference on what's allowed on those classes of people.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because what Eric has said, anyone who has restrictions won't be allowed on the site, so I think that would include employees, clients, correct me if I'm mistaken. He's shaking his head yes. So I hope that clarifies that, right? Okay.
That would, so that would include clients, you're right, because if you're asking for us to be able to enforce that someone doesn't break the law, and the law in this case being someone who potentially was on probation or parole, and a condition of that probation or parole did not allow them within a certain distance of a school, the only way we can know for sure that that client is abiding by that condition of their parole is that the check was done, and to find out that they had that, and then getting assurances that that person then does not come to the center.
To the best of, right, and to the best of our knowledge, which again won't ever be 100%, and things can slip through cracks of any system, and understanding that.
Eric, come to
on.
the...
And can I put my card up there?
Yeah.
I worked for Downtown Streets Team. That's the organization that works in 14 cities with people experiencing homelessness. They do not do background checks. They don't do any of the regular intake forms, applications that larger social work, life moves, and organizations do, because these people are on the ground homeless. You can't get somebody who is sleeping on the ground to give you all this information, complete a form to do a background check. They don't do it. That is, you have to have a low entry point to get these people to believe in Eric, to even get up and want to go do the work. You can't do criminal background checks. They don't do them. The people that are doing criminal background checks, Life Moves is doing that once they're getting them through the system. for housing vouchers, for all the other things. When you're working, Eric is working with people that aren't gonna come and get a criminal background check to go to work and work on a farm or clean up trash. And Downtown Streets team has been doing it for 14 years. They're not doing any background checks on anybody. Okay, I understand where we're located, where he wants to go in the building. My son is at the school. It doesn't matter where the school, how we are related to where the school is. There's people experiencing homelessness in front of Safeway, everywhere. Everywhere we are in Half Moon Bay, in San Jose, wherever I go in San Francisco, our kids see it, we're part of it. I understand this, the scare and all of the things that could really happen, but you're not gonna be able to guarantee anything. It's a small town. Even if the building was, the one suggestion at the first, sorry, I'm very passionate about this and speaking. Even if it was the other side of Half Moon Bay, it's a small town. Our kids are here. It could be near the high school. It could be by the elementary school. There isn't a place that's going to be isolated from our children. And you're not gonna know, you cannot do criminal background checks. The loan shouldn't even include what you've got on there. That line should be removed from the loan agreement. What is that? You're right, he's a social worker, not social worker. We are a nonprofit organization. Why are we being held to have these requirements in your loan to begin with? He's going to work with the law enforcement, the gentleman coming here on his day off or after hours just to speak to you proves that he has a relationship with them. It just baffles me, I'm sorry. But Downtown Streets team, you're not gonna get criminal background checks on these folks. You can forget it. You start doing that, you won't have any of these people even coming to work. Sorry.
So I was just going to say, as I was sitting down, the background checks are already happening. There's no population that's stopped and checked more often than the homeless. You know, the folks that I work with tell me every month how they get stopped and checked, sometimes several times a week. I think our sheriffs know who they are. They stop them regularly. They have relationships with them. These background checks are already happening with every single homeless person. And if they have warrants, they go to jail over the hill, and then they come back when that's cleaned up, you know? It's already happening.
And in addition to that, we're not asking Eric to stop hiring people. We're not asking Eric to stop giving food to people or to try to get them into programs. Eric is asking us if he could have a building where these folks could come during daylight hours under supervision.
You're not going to change your mind, right?
I mean, I don't get it. It's not an issue. It's a non-issue. It shouldn't be. That shouldn't be in the contract at all. I wish I were more eloquent. I'd say it better, but it makes no sense to me. We're being asked to give some money to a nonprofit to build a building where he can take people from in front of the gas station and give them a little shelter during the day where they could also get a shower, which I think all of us would like to see happen, and wash their clothes and get a cup of coffee. Seems simple.
The reality is that anything we do tonight has to be unanimous. All three of us have to agree. And it is my sense that at this point, we don't have unanimity. And regardless of my personal feelings, and I completely agree with Councilmember Penrose, at this point, I think the only sensible thing to do is to have staff vet the possible changes to the loan agreement and have the entire council here in 2 weeks, where we don't need unanimity to approve the loan agreement. So that's the reality. Is it clear what our direction is?
Mr. Mayor, if that is your direction, we would like a motion and a vote to that effect.
You want to propose it since you're the person?
Yeah, I move that we delay our vote till 2 weeks, till our next meeting, giving staff enough time to research and suggest language for a process that you already articulated.
I'll second that. Can we have a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Brownstone,
Aye.
Councilmember Penrose,
Aye.
Mayor Rohrbach,
Yes.
motion carries.
The next item is city commission and committee updates. No, okay. Next item is future discussion, possible agenda items. The next item is city council reports. This meeting is adjourned.